Hi, I'm Elisabeth and I'm currently studying on the Executive Global Masters in Management program here at the LSE, and I'm here to speak to you today about how you raise awareness around cancer to 1.25 billion people, that is in the country of India, of course. Allow me, before we go into that, to provide some context on India. You are talking about the most populous country in the world, and cancer rates over the next couple of years, when I say couple, 5 years, are due to rise by 40%. That means that the infrastructure that is currently in place will essentially completely fall over in the country. The four most prevalent types of cancer are breast cancer and cervical cancer for women, and neck and throat, mouth and lung sort of related cancers for men. The predominant causes for those are essentially, for the women, lifestyle, moving from rural areas into cities where they change their lifestyle, and also hygiene factors, particularly related to cervical cancer. And for men, it's a lot of alcohol consumption, and about 60 to 66% of the people in India chew tobacco. So those are the predominant causes. Now, why am I talking to you about this today? I want to talk to you particularly today about two key areas that we have been learning on the course and that definitely relate to this, to the challenge that we were facing there. So the first one relates to culture. The second one is then going into more marketing strategy areas where we'll talk about targeting of messaging, segmentation of customers or channeling, etc. So on the cultural front, there's a couple of theories that we learned about, and the first one was really, I'll liken it to an iceberg. When you first come into another culture or another country, there's the tip of the iceberg, which you see, right? It's very obvious when I rocked up in India that I didn't look particularly Indian. I stuck out like a sore thumb. That's really the tip of the iceberg. You've then got the next level down, which is all around the behaviors, which you can still observe, you can still see, and I think my favorite was actually the head shake, which to me was so foreign. I did start imitating it at the end, but it meant that I needed to seek some clarification sometimes because I didn't always understand what people meant. But then there was the really underlying and really core bit of the iceberg, which was really hard to get to, which is all around what sorts of assumptions and beliefs people hold. And that, for me, manifested itself a lot in being asked whether I lived in a joint family. Now, a joint family, for those of you who don't know, and I didn't before I went, is essentially whether, when I married, I was going to move in with my husband's family, and that meant grandmothers, etc., etc. So that's how culture manifests itself. A tool that I used to really start to understand Indian culture and how it would be different to me was Gerrit Hofstede's. There's a fantastic website which you can refer to. Gerrit Hofstede has looked at different dimensions within culture and has actually thought about how different they are and how they vary between cultures. The first one is all around power distance. Power distance is how hierarchical you are, how you relate to other people within the culture that you're in. Now, in India, power distance is really high. People are incredibly hierarchical, whereas the culture that I'm used to, having worked in the UK and being German, is significantly less hierarchical. So for me, there was definitely an adjustment that I needed to make, and it was really useful to have the tool and also the context from the course to understand that. Another aspect of the Indian culture which came out from Gerrit Hofstede's model is the masculinity dimension. That really looks at how masculine traits that we would look at in terms of confidence, that we would look at in terms of, what the alpha type trait, if you want, how they manifest themselves. And whilst India, I found this an interesting paradox, has had a female prime minister and does have very female people in senior positions, they actually have quite a high masculinity dimension. Whereas again, the cultures that I've worked in, that I'm aware of, has a much lower masculinity index. So for me, that meant that I needed to adjust the behaviors that I was displaying to the colleagues that I was working with, the people I was meeting, so that I could actually maximize the impact that I had. That's the cultural dimensions that I wanted to talk about. We're now going to move on to the marketing framework that we talked about. So really, Marketing 101, and it was our first lecture, was make sure you get your segmentation model right. So what do we mean by that? We mean, who are we talking to? Who is the target audience, or who is the target customer? What are we trying to sell to them, i.e. what is the key message? And then most importantly, how are we going about doing that? And those three need to align. So if you get one of those wrong, your message essentially falls to pieces and you attract or you talk to the wrong audience in the wrong way. The challenge that I had on my hands was to think about how to better communicate the threats around tobacco, around alcohol, and also raise awareness around, the stages of cancer so that people could start to come earlier and be treated earlier. Also, things like screening. So I went to visit a number of different projects that were already going on and realized very quickly that it was essentially a bit of a, we'll talk to everybody about everything. So there was men, there was women in the audience, and they were talking about breast and cervical as well as oral cancer. So one of the first recommendations that I thought would be helpful was to really hone in on that target audience. So if you're talking about breast or cervical cancer, talk to women, and talk to women of the ages that actually will find this relevant. In terms of the messaging, like I said, was particularly broad brush when I first got there. And some of the recommendations I started to make was, do you know what? They probably don't need to know what the different types of cancers are called, big long medical terms. Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it really, really honed into the point and make sure that you're speaking to them in a language that is actually relevant to people. The final thing is then the how. So how do you go about spreading the message? And I sort of looked at this in a couple of different ways. So first of all, you have to think channel and you have to think placement. India is huge, and India, there's 20 plus different states, there's 20 plus different languages, so you have to take that into consideration. On top of that, you've got a completely split society insofar as that part live in rural areas and part live in urban centers. Rural people are much less connected to things like technology, whereas urban centers are much more connected. So in terms of that channel thinking, if you're going to target middle-income women or high-income women in urban areas, you're much more likely to actually use channels that depend on technology. You might also think about, putting an advert or something in the Vogue or the Elle of India, because that's what they're more likely to read. The other thing that I've briefly referred to is that whole piece about technology. So I found out, doing some research while I was there, that about 1 in 4 people in India have smartphones, right? So we're talking 25% of the population in India, which is 1.25 billion, have a connection to the internet. When I started to dig down, I found out that nobody had email addresses, or not everybody. They all had WhatsApp, right? But nobody had emails. So what you need to start thinking about when you're thinking about those channels is really, what do people use? Where are you going to get your messages across? So one of the recommendations that I did provide was around using WhatsApp as a much better channel. The other thing was that I saw lots of people on their smartphones looking at videos. So how can you get short 40-second clips that can be very easily streamed onto their mobile phones so that they start to see, how do you screen for breast cancer? How do you, go for your check? Where is it possible to do that? So leveraging technology much, much more. That was really the framework that I started to provide around the whole customer segmentation. And through all that, I was able to provide the hospital that I was working with a structure that allowed them to really think about how they were going to start messaging out and start to also think across India to collaborate in a better way to start making sure that the messages they were giving out, not just from the one hospital in Mumbai, but from all of the cancer hospitals in India, that they would be aligned to make sure that actually all of the hospitals were saying the same thing at the same time to the same people, and therefore strengthening that message much more. I hope you found that helpful. A bit of an experience that I've had. It's definitely been great for me to use some of the skills that I've learned over the course here at the LSE, and I look forward to using them more, both in my day job and in future opportunities.